lot of people are out of work, can't pay their bills, at risk of being evicted, can't afford food, going through their savings. They're going to be left with nothing by the time this is over. And it really all comes down to one thing: faith. People had too much faith in government to make sure we had a good economy, to make sure everyone had jobs, to make sure we had all these social safety nets, to make sure that we would never come into a situation like this again. It was just faith. Faith that these crooked politicians that we elected were building a system that would make sure everything would always be okay. Is everything okay? Nope. Everything was okay when everything was good, but then a couple things go bad and everything falls apart because we put too much faith in government. And a lot of people say, well, then what's the solution? You get rid of government? That's no good. We need government for all these things. Things would be even worse if we didn't have police. Things would be even worse if we didn't have roads. Things would be even worse if the government wasn't printing and handing out money. Well, the answer might not be to get rid of all of government, at least not right away. But at least we have to get rid of all the systems that are causing all the damage, that are causing all the harm, that are giving us this false sense of faith and trust that the government is going to be able to make things right, whether they want to or not. Whether they care about us or not, they've proven they're incapable. And when I say getting rid of these systems, we have to understand that the solution might be a little bit counterintuitive. For example, the FHA. But the FHA helps people buy houses that are too expensive for them to afford without special government-backed loans. We can't get rid of the FHA, especially not now. But the reason the FHA is needed is because of the conditions the FHA has created. I'll get into that more in a minute. But what I mean by counterintuitive is the government sees a problem and it tries to fix it. And by fixing it, they make the problem worse. Now the fix was intuitive. We need more people to buy homes. Well, intuitively, if people had more money, they'd buy more homes. And so that was the intuitive solution to solving that problem. But it didn't work. In fact, it made things worse. And the program's been around for so long, most people don't remember what life was like before it. I didn't even realize this until I spent some time down in Mexico to see how they do it. They have higher home ownership. Most homeowners are not in debt like they are in the United States. The United States has lower home ownership. Most people are just renting. I shouldn't say most, but much more people are just renting. And the ones that own their homes don't really own their homes. The bank owns their homes. They own debt. They owe debt. They owe trillions of dollars collectively to banks. But we had faith that the government was going to solve the problem and get us all houses. And from the looks of it, on the surface, it seems like that, right? Because a lot of people are in houses. A lot of people have a house that's in their name, And they say, if it weren't for the FHA loan, I never could have qualified to borrow enough money to buy this house. That's what they say. They don't realize they don't even own the house, because the little mortgage paper that's tucked away in their cabinet somewhere is not as visually apparent as the actual house that they're living in. It's not as actually apparent, that the house is more physically apparent than the fact that if they miss a couple payments, the bank can kick them out. And they can lose everything that they've put into it. Potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. They can lose all of that. Imagine you spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a house, and you lose your job, and you can't make a couple payments, and you lose everything. Now, sometimes the bank will give you a little bit back on that, but don't count on it. What about property tax? If you have a house and it's in your name, it's not so visibly apparent that if you stop paying your property tax because you lost your job, that the government can come along and kick you out and take your house, and you will lose the hundreds of thousands of dollars that you invested into that house. Sometimes you'll get a little bit back. That's not a guarantee. Don't count on it. So I talked about the FHA and how the FHA has made these problems worse. There's actually 4 things that I think have made this problem worse. The FHA is one of them. The property tax, the inheritance tax, and the income tax. And the reason this is important is because this faith that we have, the government is always going to take care of things for us. It's an illusion. We don't have backup plans. What happens if the government can't? What happens if we lose our jobs? What happens if the government's economy fails? And yes, it's the government's economy. The economy we have now only exists because the only money that's allowed to change hands is only the money that the government allows to change hands. The only jobs that exist are only the jobs that the government allows to exist. The only businesses that exist are only the businesses that government allows to exist. We need a backup plan. That backup plan means we need to have homes that if the economy seizes and we lose our jobs and we lose our source of income, that we're not at risk of losing everything. We're not at risk of losing our homes. We're not at risk of losing the shelter above our heads, the basic necessity of human survival. We're not at risk of losing the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we've been spending to build and have that roof over our heads, whether it's been through investment in a property or whether it's been paying rent. If this money can just be taken away from us, we are not standing on solid ground. That's the first thing we need to fix. So the FHA was clever. See, before the FHA, most people bought their homes cash. And they were able to do that because homes weren't as expensive. Yes, I know there's a lot of inflation, but you used to be able to buy a house for $5,000. $5,000. Now I get it. Inflation. Back when you could buy a house for $5,000, if you were lucky to get a salary, it might have been $1 an hour, something like that. Well, if you're making $10 an hour now, that's 10 times $1. So what if your house cost 10 times $5,000? That would be $50,000. These were decent houses. These weren't beat up old shacks that were falling apart. Can you find a house for $50,000 in your city now? No. Probably closer to the area, $150,000, maybe $300,000. I had a temp job in a mortgage company once, a long time ago, and I had no idea what I was doing. And I was flipping through mortgages, and I saw a shitty little house in South Central LA had just sold for $300,000. Right in the heart of gang violence. Supposedly. I say supposedly because gang violence wasn't always as big as they made it out to be, but that's another story. So, why are these houses so expensive? Well, you understand that if you walk into any place, let's say you walk into an auction and they're auctioning off something that you want, and everybody in that auction house has $10 in their pocket, and everybody really wants this thing, who's going to get it? Anyone, could be anyone, whoever wants to bid $10, that's all they've got. Now imagine one guy in there has $100,000. He could bid $100,000 on that. Of course, he's not going to be able to get whatever the next thing is up for auction, so someone else might get the next one for $10. But he could bid up to $100. So, if he really wants this, of course, if everybody else only has $10, why would you bid $100? You'd bid $11, because nobody could beat that price. Now imagine, somebody walks into the room and tells everybody in the room, hey, you can bid as much as you want. I'll give anybody a loan for $500 to buy that thing. Well, a couple people are going to be dumb enough to say, oh, well, it's free money. Might as well take it. I really want that thing. Sure, I'll bid $500. So now the price of this thing that was $10 is now $500. And the people who only have $10 just can't afford it. They're smart enough to know they don't want debt, but they can't afford this thing because everybody else is taking on debt. Now, I'm not entirely against debt. There are useful purposes for debt. It should be used carefully. But debt and lent money does inflate prices. It does inflate markets, especially when the person lending says, I will lend as much money as you want, but only if you buy this one product with it. So now imagine if you could borrow $1 million to buy a house, but you couldn't borrow a single penny to buy a new TV. Would that affect the prices of TVs? No. Would it affect the prices of houses? Yep. So you have the FHA, which specifically works to make sure that there are loans going out for houses. Lots and lots and lots of loans. Because the government has this theory that the more money they dump into the economy, the more money will circulate. Except it creates all this debt, and it puts people on that unstable foundation. It puts people in quicksand, where if they lose their job and they can't make a payment, they're gonna lose their house and everything that they've put into it thus far. And let me emphasize that. If you've been working for 10 years and finally all of your money's been drained on rent and taxes and driver's licenses and all these other things that you've had to pay for over the course of 10 or 20 years to save up this money to make a down payment on a house, and you miss a couple payments and they take your entire house. They are taking that entire down payment, all of that equity that you spent 10 or 20 years saving up to put into that house. It's gone. They've not just taken your house. It's not like you can just say, I'll start all over, especially since they've ruined your credit. They have taken everything from you. They have destroyed potentially the next 10 to 20 years of your life, trying to get back to where you first were. So now you've lost 40 years of your life. That's what they're doing. And the FHA makes this possible. Because the banks used to say, well, okay, some people want to borrow money, but let's say a house is $100,000. If we lend them $100,000 and they skip the first payment, I mean, they didn't put anything into it. Why would they care if we took the house away from them? They're not losing anything. And if we take this house from them for $100,000, sure, we bought a house for $100,000, but we're not in the real estate business. We don't want to buy a bunch of houses and be stuck with a bunch of houses and then have to worry about how do we sell these and potentially sell them at a loss because we just want to get rid of them so we can get the money so we can lend again, because that's the business they're in. They don't want to do that. So before the FHA, they used to say, if you really want a loan, give us 60% down. 60% down sounds like a lot of money, but back in that time, when the cost of a house was only $5,000 or less, you might have been able to save up your 60% down payment in just a couple years, spend another couple years paying it off, which is what the loan terms were before the FHA. You'd get a 5-year loan, you'd pay 60% down, the house would be yours in 5 years, plus whatever it took you to earn the down payment, maybe 10 years, instead of 30 years, plus whatever it takes to get your down payment. So it's easy money. What do we say about easy money? It inflates the price of houses when those loans are only available for houses. Now, why would they take a 3% down payment now? Now that the FHA is around, why would they take a 3% down payment? I mean, they might as well just take 0% down payment, right? Banks don't do that. They're not in that business. Why would they take a 3% down payment? Because the government told them you have to. But we're going to insure that. So now when you get your FHA mortgage, you only pay 3% down, but you're also paying mortgage insurance. There's an insurance plan, and you're paying an extra couple $100 a month, which equates over the lifetime of the loan, equates to thousands of dollars, maybe another $10,000 going into your loan of your already inflated housing price. So you're paying extra money so you can borrow more money so you can buy an inflated house. What else is there? So the FHA is one of those problems, one of those 4 problems that's contributing to the fact that we don't live on a solid foundation. And the fact that we don't live on a solid foundation is the real reason everybody is panicked right now. Because if we lived on a solid foundation, we wouldn't be worried about any kind of shutdown. Not that I think the shutdown is right, but these people who are getting arrested because they have to keep their business open, they have to keep their bar open, they have to keep their gym open. The reason these people are willing to get arrested is because they know if they don't keep their business open, they could lose everything. Not only could they lose their business, they could lose their homes. Because they probably have mortgages too. Everything that they've been spending the last 20, 30 years for, maybe even a business that's been in the family for a generation or two. is at risk because there's no solid foundation. Why is there no solid foundation? Because people put too much faith in the government to make sure that we always had jobs, to make sure that the economy was always flowing, to make sure that we had all these social safety nets, so that if anything like this ever happened, we wouldn't have to worry. But are you worried?